The first sharp crack was mistaken for thunder, a common enough sound in the dense pine forests of the Pacific Northwest. Leo, hunched over a sheet of scribbled musical notations, barely glanced up from his work. But the second sound was different, a shrieking tear through the atmosphere, followed by a ground-shaking thud that rattled the windows of his secluded cabin. Silence returned, deeper and more profound than before. No crickets, no wind, just a void of sound where the forest's nightly chorus had been. Years of living alone, of seeking quiet after the cacophony of a life he'd left behind, had honed his instincts. This was wrong. Setting his pencil down with deliberate slowness, he stood. He didn't reach for a gun. Leo's weapons were silence and solitude. Instead, he pulled on a worn jacket and stepped out into the chill night air. The scent of ozone and scorched metal hung heavy. A faint, unnatural orange glow pulsed from a clearing a half-mile into the woods. He moved without a flashlight, his feet finding familiar paths in the dark. As he drew closer, the smell intensified, and the air hummed with a low, residual energy that made the hairs on his arms stand up. There, nestled in a crater of smoldering earth and shattered saplings, was a vessel. It was nothing from any earthly agency. He could recognize sleek, silver, and organic in shape. Like a fallen teardrop, a portion of the hull was torn open, revealing a dimly lit interior. A part of him screamed to turn back, to call some authority he didn't trust. But a softer, more compelling sound reached him, a faint, ragged gasp. He climbed over the hot, twisted wreckage and peered inside. The interior was a small, single-occupant pod. Wires and crystalline conduits hung from the ceiling, sparking intermittently. And there, slumped against a collapsed console, was a woman. At least, the shape was feminine. She was tall and slender, clad in a form-fitting suit of a material that seemed to shift between gray and blue. Her skin held a subtle, pearlescent sheen, and her hair, the color of spun silver, was matted with a trace of vivid blue blood from a gash on her temple. She was conscious, her eyes wide with pain and fear. They were the color of amethysts, and they locked onto his with a startling intensity. She tried to speak, her voice a hoarse, melodic whisper, the syllables utterly alien. She flinched, clutching her side. In her other hand, she gripped a small, glowing crystal the size of her thumb, holding it as if it were her very soul. "Hey," Leo said, his voice low and calm, the one he used to soothe the spooked animal. "It's all right. You're safe." He had no idea if that was true, but the words felt necessary. He took a cautious step closer, his hands open and visible. She shrank back, a flicker of panic in her extraordinary eyes. Then her gaze darted past him, scanning the tree line as if expecting monsters to emerge. "Please," she rasped, and this time, the word was clear, strained through obvious pain, but unmistakable. It was a plea learned in desperation. Leo made a decision. He couldn't leave her here. He pointed to her, then to himself, then back toward the direction of his cabin. "I can help. My home is close." She stared at him, her chest rising and falling with shallow, pained breaths. He saw the calculation in her eyes, the weighing of a terrible risk. Finally, her shoulders slumped in exhausted resignation. She gave a single, sharp nod. Moving slowly, he stepped forward and slid an arm around her to help her up. She was lighter than he expected, but he could feel the tense, coiled strength in her frame. As he helped her out of the broken pod, her free hand gripped his arm, her touch surprisingly cool. She wouldn't, or couldn't, let go of the small crystal. The walk back to the cabin was slow and arduous. She leaned heavily on him, her breath catching with every other step. Once inside, he guided her to his worn sofa, the only soft surface in the sparsely furnished room. She sank into it with a quiet sigh, her amethyst eyes taking in her surroundings with a mix of wariness and profound weariness. He brought her a glass of water and a clean cloth for the cut on her head. She drank greedily, then allowed him to dab gently at the wound. Her blood was indeed a brighter, more vibrant blue than human blood. "What's your name?" he asked softly. She hesitated, her gaze searching his face. Then she touched her chest. "Siren, Siren," he repeated. The name felt like a quiet chord on a piano. "I'm Leo." He gestured to the crystal she still clutched in a white-knuckled grip. "Is that important?" Her eyes widened slightly, and she pulled it closer to her chest. Everything, she whispered for a long while. There was only the sound of the crackling fire in the hearth. Leo sat in a chair opposite her, giving her space. The initial shock was wearing off, leaving a staggering reality in its wake. An alien in his cabin. He was harboring a being from another world. As the night deepened, Siren's exhaustion finally overtook her fear. Her eyelids fluttered closed, and her breathing evened out into sleep. Leo remained awake, watching her. The quiet of the forest had returned, but it was different now. It was a silence filled with her presence. Then, something shifted. The small crystal in her relaxed hand began to glow a soft, steady blue, and from it, a sound emerged. Not a loud one, but a whisper of music that seemed to emanate from the air itself. It was a single, unearthly melody, pure and clear, and filled with a sorrow so profound it made his heart ache. It was a sound no human instrument could ever replicate. A song of stars and loss and a home unimaginably far away. In that moment, Leo, the composer who had sought to escape all noise, understood. He wasn't just sheltering a fugitive. He was in the presence of an artist, and her art was a language he yearned to understand. The days that followed settled into a fragile, quiet rhythm. Siren's physical wounds healed with an astonishing speed that betrayed her non-human biology. But the shadow in her amethyst eyes remained. She was a silent presence in Leo's cabin, often standing by the window, her gaze lost in the dense green of the woods, the crystalline data device never far from her touch. Leo, for his part, respected her silence. He continued his work, scribbling notes on parchment, the soft scratch of his pencil the only sound between them for hours. He was composing a piece about the forest, about the way the light fell through the canopy, and he found himself acutely aware of her listening presence. One evening, as the sun bled orange through the trees, he sat at his old, slightly out-of-tune piano. He'd avoided it since her arrival, feeling it an intrusion, but the urge to play, to communicate in the only language he truly mastered, became overwhelming. His fingers found the keys, and he began to play the piece he was writing. It was a gentle, flowing melody, full of longing and a quiet, earthy peace. He didn't look at her, but he felt her shift. When he finished the final, lingering note, he turned. Siren was watching him, and a single, shimmering tear traced a path down her pearlescent cheek. It was not blue, but clear, catching the firelight. She didn't speak, but the look in her eyes was a translation in itself. It was a look of someone who had been starving and was finally offered bread. The next day, she approached him as he sat at the table. She placed her crystal between them. "Your music, it has a soul," she said, her voice gaining strength, though the alien cadence remained. "It is different from ours." "How?" Leo asked, genuinely curious. "We compose with mathematics, with the resonance of celestial bodies. It is perfect, ordered." She looked down at the crystal. "Your music is imperfect. It has breath. It has a heartbeat. It feels like a living thing." She tapped the crystal. A complex, breathtaking harmony filled the room. It was the starlit refrain he had heard the first night, but now it was fuller, a symphony of swirling nebulae, and the silent dance of moons. It was beautiful, but it was distant. It was a song about emotion, not one born from it. "This is my world's song," she said softly. "It is our history, our knowledge, but it does not have this." She gestured vaguely towards the piano, towards him. "This heartache." A bridge was built in that moment, not of words, but of shared understanding. Leo began to play for her every day. He played Chopin's mournful notes, Debussy's impressionist watercolors in sound, and his own raw, unfinished compositions. And in return, Siren shared her music. She showed him symphonies of light from dying stars, the rhythmic pulse of quantum fields, the choir of a solar wind. They were to translators, decoding the soul of their respective worlds. He learned that her crystal was not just a storage device. It was an echo shard, a repository of her people's collective memory and the source of their power. And she was its living curator. One afternoon, as a soft rain tapped against the roof, they sat side by side on the piano bench. Leo played a simple chord progression. Siren, her fingers hovering over the echo shard, wove a melody around it. Her alien harmonies twisted around his human chords, not clashing, but completing them. The sound they created together was entirely new. It was the sound of pine needles and starlight, of solitude and connection. As the last note faded, they sat in the resonant silence, their shoulders touching. Leo could feel the warmth of her through his shirt. He turned his head to find her already looking at him, her amethyst eyes wide and unguarded. The air between them grew thick, charged with an unspoken truth. "Leo," she whispered, his name a prayer on her lips. He reached out, his calloused composer's hand covering her slender, cool one where it rested on the piano keys. She didn't pull away. Instead, she turned her hand over, her fingers intertwining with his. It was then that a low, deep hum vibrated through the cabin, a sound that was not of the forest or the storm. It was the sound of engines. A shadow passed over the window, too large and too silent to be a cloud. Siren's hand tightened in his, her face paling. The peace was shattered. The fear returned to her eyes, sharper than before. "They're here," she breathed. The hum of the ship's engines faded, but the silence it left behind was heavy with threat. Leo moved quickly, pulling Siren away from the window and into the shadows of the cabin. "Who are they?" he whispered, his voice tight. "The usurper's hunters," Siren replied, her body tense. "They have found my echo shard's resonance. They will not stop." Before Leo could respond, a voice, amplified and eerily calm, echoed from outside. "Siren of Stellara, you are a fugitive from imperial justice. Surrender the echo shard and you will be granted a swift return." The voice was alien, yet perfectly enunciated. It sent a chill down Leo's spine. He peered through a crack in the wooden shutter. 3 figures stood in the clearing. They were tall, clad in dark, armored suits that seemed to drink the light. Their leader had sharp, severe features and eyes that glowed with a cold, yellow light. "This was Vor. He lies," Siren whispered, her breath warm against his ear. "If I surrender, I die. The shard dies with me." Leo's mind raced. His cabin was a fortress of solitude, not of war. He had no weapons that could stand against whatever they were. Then, a new sounded different engine, higher pitched and aggressive. Another, smaller craft descended rapidly, landing between Vor's ship and the cabin. Its hatch opened and a single figure emerged. This one was different. His armor was less ornate, but scarred from battle. He carried no visible weapon, but his stance was that of a warrior. "Kellen," Siren breathed, a mixture of relief and anguish in her voice. "Vor." "The new rival," Kellen shouted. "Your quarrel is with the Stellara Guard, not with this world. Leave this place." Vor's laugh was a dry, unpleasant sound, the last remnants of a failed dynasty. "You are too late, Guardian. The air is mine." The standoff lasted only a second. Vor made a sharp gesture. One of his soldiers raised a weapon that glowed with malevolent green energy. Kellen moved with blinding speed, a blade of pure light appearing in his hand as he deflected the blast. Chaos erupted. Leo acted on pure instinct. He grabbed Siren's hand and his backpack, which he'd kept ready since her arrival. The back door, now. They burst out into the cool air, just as an energy blast tore through the front wall of the cabin, splintering wood and sending a shower of sparks into the room. The acrid smell of ozone and burnt timber filled the air. Leo didn't look back. He pulled Siren into the tree line, their feet slipping on the wet pine needles. Behind them, the sounds of battle intensified, the sizzle of energy weapons, the clash of Kellen's light blade, and Vor's roared commands. They ran, the forest swallowing them whole. Leo led her on a twisting path, away from the sounds, deeper into the wilderness he knew so well. After what felt like an eternity, they reached a small, hidden cave behind a waterfall, a place he had found as a boy. Collapsing inside the damp, dark space, they sat in silence, their ragged breaths echoing. The roar of the waterfall masked any sound of pursuit. Siren was trembling, not from cold, but from adrenaline and loss. She looked at him, her eyes luminous in the dim light. "My home," she said softly, meaning the cabin. "I am sorry, Leo. It was wood and nails," he said, though the loss of his sanctuary cut deep. "You're alive. For how long?" she asked, the despair in her voice palpable. "They will not stop. Vor will burn this world to cinders to find me." It was then that Kellen appeared at the mouth of the cave, his armor scorched and a fresh cut on his cheek. He moved silently, like a ghost. Siren started, but relaxed when she saw him. "My lady," Kellen said, his voice a low rumble of deference. He glanced at Leo, his expression unreadable. "The human, he is under my protection," Siren said, her tone regal, leaving no room for argument. Kellen gave a curt nod. "Vor is regrouping. His ship's sensors are scanning the area. We have minutes, not hours." He looked at Siren, his gaze intense. "We must leave this world. Now, the rebellion is fragmented. But there are still those who are loyal. We can rally them, but only if we go now." Siren looked from Kellen's determined face to Leo's. She saw the quiet life she had briefly known crumbling to ash. She saw the fear, but also the steadfast resolve in the human composer's eyes. "Leo," she said, her voice firm, "you have a choice. You can stay. You can return to your life when we are gone. You will be safe." Leo looked at her. He saw the silver-haired woman who had found solace in his music. He saw the queen fighting for her birthright. He saw the connection that had grown between them, a melody more compelling than any he had ever written. Staying behind meant returning to a silence that now felt like a prison. He picked up his backpack, which contained his musical notations and the small, portable keyboard he used for travel. "I'm not letting you finish our duet alone," he said. A true, unburdened smile, the first he had ever seen, broke across Siren's face. Kellen simply gestured towards his waiting ship. "Then let us begin the next movement," Siren said. And as the three of them vanished into the belly of the small, swift ship, the waterfall continued its endless roar, the only witness to the end of one life and the violent, hopeful beginning of another. The interior of Kellen's ship, the Dawnchaser, was a stark contrast to Leo's cabin, all cool, gleaming metal and softly pulsing control panels. As the earth shrank to a blue marble and then vanished into the star-dusted black, Leo felt a profound disorientation, a severing of his very roots. Seren, however, seemed to transform. The set of her shoulders straightened, the fear in her amethyst eyes replaced by a steely resolve. She was returning to her element. "The usurper's greatest weapon is not his fleet, but his narrative," she explained to Leo as Kellen piloted them towards a hidden rebel base. "He told my people I was dead, that the Stellara line was extinguished in weakness. The Echo Shard holds the truth, but its song can only be heard by a few. We must amplify it. We must make the entire empire feel the lie." Their destination was a derelict mining station hidden in the asteroid belt of a dead star. It was a bleak, functional place, populated by a ragtag group of rebels whose eyes lit up with fervent hope at the sight of Siren. They were the last loyalists, a ghost army waiting for a leader. The plan was audacious. Siren's starlit refrain, the foundational song of her dynasty, was encoded with genetic command keys. When broadcast on the right resonance, it could awaken the dormant loyalist programming in the soldiers and citizens who had been forced into submission. But the usurper's jamming technology was powerful. A pure transmission would be blocked. "That is where you come in, human," Kellen said. His arms crossed as he looked at Leo. "Your music, it is unpredictable, chaotic. It operates on frequencies their systems are not designed to filter. You are the static in their signal, the dissonance in their perfect order." Leo understood. He was to be the carrier wave for her revolution. For days, they worked in a converted cargo bay that served as their lab. Leo composed, his earth-born melodies clashing and merging with the celestial mathematics of Siren's refrain. It was a painful, beautiful process. Sometimes their harmonies fought, creating jarring, unpleasant noise. Other times, they fused into something transcendent, a sound that made the very air vibrate with potential energy. During these moments, Leo would look at Siren and see not a queen, but his partner in creation. One night, exhausted and mentally drained, they sat together in the ship's small observation deck, watching the alien asteroid field drift past. "Why did you choose this?" Leo asked quietly. "You could have found a quiet world like mine. You could have been safe." Siren was silent for a long time. "The Echo Shard is not just a record, Leo. It is the soul of my people. To abandon it is to let my culture, our history, our very identity, be rewritten by a tyrant. It would be a different kind of death." She looked at him, her gaze intense. "Why did you choose this? You could have been safe." Siren was silent for a long time. The echo shard is not just a record, Leo. It is the soul of my people. To abandon it is to let my culture, our history, our very identity, be rewritten by a tyrant. It would be a different kind of death. She looked at him, her gaze intense. Why did you choose this? You could have been safe. Leo didn't hesitate. Because the most beautiful music I have ever heard is the one we make together, and I'm not ready for the song to end. He reached out, his fingers gently brushing a strand of silver hair from her face. His touch was a question. Her answer was to lean into it, her cool skin against his warm hand. She turned her head, her lips softly pressing against his palm. It was a quiet, tender moment amidst the looming storm, a single, pure note in the cacophony of rebellion. Then she leaned in further, and her lips found his. The kiss was not of desperation, but of confirmation. It was a silent vow, a merging of two melodies into one unbreakable chord. When they parted, the understanding between them was absolute. They were no longer a composer and a queen, but to halves of a single purpose. The next day, Kellen announced the time had come. The usurper's fleet was mobilizing for a major offensive. It was now or never. Leo and Siren stood side by side before the main broadcast console. The rebel fleet, a handful of scrappy ships, waited for the signal. Across the empire, millions of people, their wills suppressed, went about their lives unaware that their world was about to change. Ready? Siren asked, her hand hovering over the echo shard interface. Leo placed his fingers on his keyboard, his heart pounding a rhythm of fear and exhilaration. Always, their eyes met. They nodded. And together, they began to play, the combined symphony, the ancient, ordered starlight of Siren's people and the raw, emotional landscape of Leo's earth erupted from the station. It washed over the rebel fleet, and then, using Leo's composition as a sonic key, it punched through the usurper's jamming field. The music flooded the Imperial communication channels. It played in city squares, on military vessels, in the homes of the common people. And as it played, the rebellion was not sparked by a weapon, but by a song. And at its heart was a love that had bridged the void between stars. The command center of the rebel flagship, the Starburn, was a cacophony of tense voices and flickering holographic star maps. Leo stood slightly apart, feeling the weight of 1,000 gazes. He was a solitary man in a room full of soldiers, a composer at the heart of a war. On the central dais, Siren stood with Kellen. The subtle, pearlescent sheen of her skin seemed to glow under the lights, her silver hair pulled back in a severe style that only accentuated the regal sharpness of her features. She was no longer the wounded fugitive in his cabin. She was Siren of the Stellara, the last heir. Yet, when her amethyst eyes found his across the bustling room, he saw the woman who had listened to his piano with tears in her eyes. The fleet is in position. Kellen reported, his voice a low rumble. Ver's forces are concentrated around the citadel. He knows we're coming. He expects a military assault, Siren said, her voice calm. He expects us to meet his brutality with our own. We will not. She turned to Leo, and her expression softened imperceptibly. We are ready, Leo nodded, his throat tight. The plan was audacious, a gamble that rested entirely on the power of the art they had created together. His composition, born from Earth's forests and human longing, was woven into the very fabric of her starlit refrain. Together, it was more than a song. It was an emotional key, designed to resonate with the genetic memory of her people and awaken the dormant loyalist. Symbiotes embedded within Ver's own army, they moved to the communication hub, a console surrounded by crystalline interfaces. Siren placed her data crystal into a slot. Leo stood beside her, his hand hovering over a simple interface. He'd designed a keyboard that translated his musical commands into their transmission matrix. Initiate broadcast on my mark, Siren commanded, her voice echoing across the rebel fleet. For our future, for Stellara. She nodded to Leo. He took a deep breath, the breath he always took before a performance, and let his fingers fall. The first notes were his, a low, resonant piano melody, simple and haunting, like a memory of rain on a wooden roof. It was the sound of solitude, of a quiet heart waiting for a reason to beat again. Then, Siren's voice joined in, not through sound, but as a wave of pure feeling that washed through the neural transmitters. Her starlit refrain was a tapestry of light and loss, the history of her dynasty woven into a soaring, celestial harmony, the two melodies entwined, his earthly anchor and her stellar ascent. They built together, a duet of two worlds, speaking of home not as a place, but as a connection. As the combined symphony flooded the communication channels, the view screens showing the enemy armada flickered. On the screens, they saw it. The sleek, predatory ships of Ver's fleet began to slow, their weapons systems powered down. Inside those ships, soldiers who had been conditioned for obedience were suddenly overwhelmed by a flood of feelings. They had been forced to suppress loyalty, compassion, the memory of a peaceful reign. Chaos erupted on Ver's command frequency. Reports of mutiny, of systems overriding, of crews refusing orders. "It's working," Kellen whispered, a look of stunned awe on his battle-hardened face. Then, a single ship, larger and more menacing than the others, broke from the chaotic formation. Ver's personal destroyer. It ignored the rebel fleet entirely, its cannons powering up and aiming directly for the Starborn's bridge. "He's making a final play." Kellen barked. "He means to kill the signal by killing its source." The destroyer fired. A lance of brilliant energy shot across the void. The Starborn shuddered violently as its shields absorbed the blast. But consoles exploded in showers of sparks. Leo was thrown from his seat, his head ringing, through the smoke and chaos. He saw Ver's ship closing in for the kill shot. Their shields were failing. There was no time. Leo's eyes fell on his amplifier, which was patched into the ship's main systems. An idea, insane and brilliant, flashed in his mind. He scrambled to his feet, ignoring the pain in his side. "Siren," he shouted over the alarms. "Keep playing. Give me everything you have." He didn't wait for a reply. He slammed his hands onto the keyboard, but this time, he didn't play a melody. He played dissonance. He played chaos. He fed the pure, raw power of their combined song back into the amplifier, overloading it and directing the feedback surge directly into the Starborn's external comms array. A visible wave of distorted energy, a screeching, beautiful storm of sound and light, erupted from their ship and slammed into Ver's destroyer. The enemy ship's systems, already tuned to the frequency of their transmission, were instantly overwhelmed. Its lights flickered and died, its engines sputtered, and its weapons went dark. It was dead in the water. In that moment of stunned paralysis, Kellen didn't hesitate. "All batteries, target their engines and command deck. Disable them." A volley of precise rebel fire crippled the destroyer. The fight was over. Silence descended on the bridge, broken only by the crackle of damaged wiring. Then a cheer began, tentative at first, then rising into a roar that shook the very deck plates. They had won. Days later, on the main balcony of the reclaimed citadel, Siren stood before her people. The city below, once gray and oppressive, was now alive with color and celebration. Leo stood beside her, no longer feeling out of place. "My people," Siren's voice, amplified, was gentle yet firm. "The silence is over. The Stellara line continues, not through conquest, but through connection." She turned to Leo, taking his hand in hers. Her amethyst eyes were full of a love as vast as the space between their worlds. This man, Leo, from a world called Earth, did not fight with a blade. He fought with his heart. He reminded me that a ruler's strength is not in their might, but in their capacity to feel, to create, and to love. She faced the crowd again, her voice rising with passionate conviction. "And so, I do not wish to rule alone from a throne of isolation. I wish to build an alliance, a harmony between our world and his, and I wish to build it with him by my side." She looked at Leo, a question in her eyes that was for him alone. He answered it not with words, but by lifting her hand to his lips. The crowd's cheer was deafening. Later, in the quiet of their new chambers, the sounds of celebration, a distant hum, Siren leaned against him. The small, glowing crystal that had been her only possession rested on a table, now pulsing with a soft, contented light. "I told you my music was everything," she whispered, her head on his shoulder. Leo smiled, the first truly easy smile in weeks. "You did," he said, his fingers gently tracing the line of her jaw. "But you were wrong." She looked up, puzzled. "It wasn't everything," he said softly. It was just the beginning.